Welcome to another edition of Living with Purpose. Today I have a friend and a colleague, Professor Ekin Yasin from the University of Washington. She's the Director of Communication Leadership there. More importantly, she is really at the cutting edge of empowering the next generation of young people that are going to become ethical communicators, storytellers, change makers, hopefully people all living a life of purpose. But really what she does is she does these pop-up Turkish dinners. And she's never invited me to one. So I'm hoping that after I do this podcast, I will get an invite, a Turkish dinner, which I just love. With all of that, join me in welcoming Professor Yasin.
Thank you, Akhtar, for your warm welcome, and I promise you a Turkish meal as soon as this recording is done.
All right. There we go. So let's start off. So you immigrated here. You're Turkish. Talk a little bit about your growing up, your journey. I've got to get a sense of your parents, and I want you to share a little bit about them and how that became the crucible in which you were nurtured and how that has actually led to what you're doing today.
Yes, thank you, Akhtar. So yes, a little bit about myself and my story. I arrived to the U.S. in 1999, but I actually left the U.S. in 1982. I was born in the U.S. Because my parents were immigrants to the U.S. They came here for my mother's graduate degree. My late mother dedicated her life to being a pioneer in special education in Turkey. They went there for graduate school. When I was born, they decided to return back to their country and raise me there. So even though I was born in the U.S., I have no memories of it until I returned for school. Both my parents were very much dedicated to what they did as I was growing up. I was the daughter of two professionals. And again, my mother's work was very much about advocacy for kids with autism, kids with Down syndrome. She led a foundation for many years in Turkey, trying to advocate rights and access to education. Even to this day, people who have autism can only go to school up to a certain grade in Turkey. We have no education aids. And she also worked with families and creating programming to integrate life and opportunities for kids in Turkey and creating education programs too. So I was very much inspired by her work, cultivating that community, creating opportunity for people who did not, but then also creating and expanding imagination in Turkey because there was very little understanding of everyone's special in their own way. So she wanted to advocate for that. And my dad was and is a journalist. He has been a political journalist, but in late life, he became a food and travel journalist, traveling the world. And his mission that inspired me, someone who tried to kind of preserve Turkish culture in terms of its food and food legacy. With the immersion of fast food, a lot of people were forgetting about their hometown tastes. And he actually kind of created a little of a movement with his writing, and he's done some TV shows too, to remind people of the value of their own culture and kind of how to also think about ourselves as people in the world from Turkey, but also to preserve Turkish culinary culture as well. So these are the people who made me. So I am someone who's very passionate about advocacy and creating opportunities for people. But I also love food, right? And think about different ways of also thinking about preserving culture, interacting, and creating global opportunities. So I am a direct outcome of both my parents.
And so you grew up in Turkey, in Istanbul?
I grew up in Istanbul. I'm an only child, the outcome of two professional parents. But I wasn't always a curious and active person. You know, I think I always say to my students now, in hindsight, everything makes sense, right? So, all of these things actually come together. So as a child, I was the head of a debate team. You know, I asked my husband, he's like, you don't have to win every argument, you know, but I do.
Yes.
But, you know, it's like that kind of advocacy spirit, being able to think about and articulate what people are thinking. I mean, I think I was kind of doing a version of that. I was into philosophy, literature. I've done National Philosophy Olympics, which as geeky as it is. But I was always interested in both books and also bringing people together. So that kind of inspired me. And I was also and still am interested in politics and creating opportunities. So when I was coming to the end of high school in Turkey, I grew up in a really thought-filled world because my dad was a journalist. And so our house was always filled with either authors or journalists or again, through my mom, people who were trying to kind of create educational opportunities. So that was an inspiration, but I was more interested in kind of creating and understanding how this made sense in the scope of the world. Even in the 1990s, when I was finishing high school, the world was still a complicated place. And I think back in Turkey, I knew that I had a relationship to the US. But my motivation also was I was curious about the world. For those of us maybe who grew up in different countries, we love our countries. And in our countries, there's like a really particular national surroundings. There's a lot of national concerns. And we all want to advocate for and make our countries better and create more opportunities. And I'm still very passionate about that as it relates to my own country. But even at that young age, I thought that there was also a global platform where, my curiosity could be explored with people from around the world. So I wanted to travel and go to university in the US. And I particularly wanted to study diplomacy. So I wanted to study foreign service and wanted to actually go into foreign service. And that's why I applied and got into university in Washington, D.C. and arrived to explore the world and how to make it better.
And did you study public policy or?
Yes. So actually, I went to Georgetown University.
You went to Georgetown, yeah.
School of Foreign Service. And in there, this is a program that feeds a lot of the foreign service all around the world. And we each had kind of a sub area. And so basically, my training was to be more a cultural attaché. So I studied culture and politics. So both policy on the one hand, but then also its manifestation in literature, in arts, in music. All of these are things that I was passionate about. I forgot to mention that I was a radio DJ until high school. I worked at a national radio station. I've always been a music lover. So my interest in the world also kind of stems from that love of music, knowing different artists from around the world, following the music culture of different countries. So I knew there was something there. We were all articulating something, not just in our interactions, but by various modes of communication. So that kind of passion is what I explored in my undergraduate education.
And once you finished the program, did you go into foreign service? What happened?
So, politics is a very particular thing. I think it's again, in hindsight, guys still use all those skills about diplomacy and interest and cultures and communication and interest in histories, etc. But even throughout, I realized that I was more into the connection work, but less into the maybe, not that I was not interested in politics, but in the performance of it, if that makes sense. So for a year, I worked at think tanks and NGOs in Washington, D.C., Brookings Institute, Council on Foreign Service. And as I was doing it, I realized that I really still was curious and I wanted to find out more. So at that point, I said, okay, you know what? I don't want to be a diplomat, but I want to understand the world more. So how can I do that? So I went back to grad school. The following year, I started my degree in Near East Studies in New York University. And so I studied there for 2 years. And there, my interest in kind of communication and media became interested kind of on more regional structures, how people use kind of media channels to make sense of themselves and connect people, build communities, etc. So that's what I explored. And after I finished that degree, I was still curious. So I continued school. I studied then anthropology for a couple of years at Columbia University. And again, though, I realized that I was kind of getting more and more interested as I studied everything, was communication, understanding the essence of it, and creating efficient and interesting communicative structures that enable people to connect in more meaningful sense. So that onward is kind of then a further exploration of that.
This is quite a journey, right? I mean, so in some ways, you're kind of growing up with parents who are professionals, somebody who's actually deeply engaged in the well-being of people, right? I mean, everybody is special. You're working with kids with certain forms of disabilities, and you're basically saying everybody is special, has different needs. And on the other side, you've got a father who's basically a journalist, is covering politics, and then moves into different realms. And you are also at that time DJing, doing other stuff, getting into these different explorations of foreign service, media, anthropology, and all these different things. and eventually you get a PhD.
Hey, that part is also a bit complicated. So I think it's like at that point, I would say when I was studying my PhD, I was, like with anyone else. I think we don't realize that like at the young age, I still wanted to explore more. I wanted to be quote unquote successful in some sense.
Right.
Part of my story that I rarely share is the year I started my doctoral program, I got diagnosed with cancer. At that point, it kind of, I was in my mid-20s at the time. So the first few years of my doctoral degree, I was quite bedbound. I had 3 surgeries and I had another cancer. So all of these things happened. I mentioned this because I think there's like these pivotal moments where, if I was maybe, if I didn't have those events, again, in hindsight, not at the moment, I would not, I was very curious. I wanted to explore the world, but I also wanted to explore more of myself. But then, all these things happened and I kind of, there are these life events that turn your perspective into the world. You realize that you're a human being, I think you're a vulnerable human being. And you also realize maybe this is a kind of I mentioned this also sometimes, but it gives you some sort of clarity. So after that moment, by going to my PhD program, I studied communication. I went to a media culture and communication program at New York University. But I was at the time studying still media, television. But then after that experience, I was more interested in kind of the type of communication I actually have seen my first 2 years of graduate program, which is people who have cancer, who are like navigating very many communicative structures, can't make sense of it, being in the world with that. So I kind of moved my attention to understanding communities impacted by disease and how different organizations communicate about them. Simultaneously, I also became a bit more in tune with less about being successful, I would say. And I think that was a bit early for me because of those life experiences, but more about like, how can I contribute? Like, knowing not only like, not greatly, I'm still very healthy and very alive, but like, what gives me meaning? Because I think in such a lot of people, I think communities who experience some dire sickness or were very sickly for a period and hopefully have recovered, or amidst it, your orientation changes. You see the world in a different way. You realize that you can survive because of the effort and knowledge of others. You turn outward. I became maybe more acutely aware of that. I started recognizing more, I think, what I wanted to do from a meaning standpoint versus the success standpoint, which, again, I think is very much impacted by these events.
Yeah, no, and these are just, life events absolutely have such broad impact on how you make certain decisions. Mm-hmm. And especially when these major life events happen at a very early age, it does leave an impression. So you've got your PhD, and that's when you decide that you're going to be into academia.
As I was doing my PhD and as I was finishing my PhD, I taught a lot of courses. And I've taught both at my university and at a public university at the time, at Baruch College. And this kind of inquiry that I mentioned about, like, what's giving meaning to me? Like, the common sense would have been I would have written my dissertation and listened to that call and go with that. But the more I worked with students, and I taught so many students, I always mention, whenever I'm busy, I'm like, there was a year where I taught 10 classes per semester, which, in hindsight, again, I would not do, but it was, but I enjoyed it that much. I loved working with students. I loved exploring these topics, seeing them do and manifest their impact in the world. And, the common logic would have been that I went with the traditional academia track. But I started questioning myself. Yes, I'm interested in research, understanding, I'm still curious. But I love this part of it. I really love working with students and ensuring their success and listening to their stories, collaborating with them, learning from them. And so my motivation as I was finishing my academic journey, which never ended really, was, I want to do something where I get to work with students and teach. This is now about almost 15 years ago. And at that time, teaching-based roles in academia were still relatively new.
Absolutely.
And I said, well, this is what I want to do. And I will craft myself a journey. Hopefully that will inspire others and will make some impact in the ways in which I feel I want to. Yeah.
And then how do you land up in Seattle?
At the time, my husband and I were looking at opportunities around the country, and roles at the University of Washington and communication department became available, both in the teaching side and in the research side, where my husband ended up, and I ended up in the teaching side. And, we kind of came not knowing much about Seattle and knowing a lot about the university and its legacy, which is a wonderful institution. It's a global institution. And at that moment, I had a sense I wanted to, because I worked in a private university and a public university prior to this time. I said, I want to work in a public university and I want to work with students. So whatever matches it, and I want to be able to be in a place that will allow me to explores my students' impact and cultivating programs that would facilitate that in both national and global ways. So in that way, University of Washington was checked all the boxes, and we arrived, and onwards. Now here I am.
So now you direct this program. Talk a little bit about that. It's very much a program where you have a lot of international students. It's really this hub. So talk a little bit about why that was important for you to do that.
About 3 years into my time at the University of Washington, then director of our program, Ekin Yasin, approached me. And I had some professional experience in tech. At some point at a startup, I was always kind of around food, which is food technology, but I was always kind of dabbling into also that world, worked with food, etc. But teaching. So Hanson and I had a lot of conversations. He said, I think you will really like this space. It's the type of students you want. So Communication Leadership Program has been around for now over 25 years. And it's a program that actually examines what communication and storytelling can do for a variety of organizations and communities, and how we can kind of leverage those tools to enhance the impact of what we're already doing. Well, I think we're all doing amazing things in the world. A story untold about the amazing things in the world actually impacts the impact that the initiative can have. So for 25 years, we've been working with global communities, outstanding students from all walks of life, mid-career, early career, for them to be trained either to kind of bring those skills to their existing organizations or future organizations, but then also doing it in a very responsible, value-driven, and to your point, purpose-driven way, so that students can holistically understand what they're doing. Because storytelling, we're in the age of AI, and artificial intelligence can tell stories maybe, but
right.
A part of the type of storytelling that we've been doing, and I know humans will be doing, is not just about telling a good story. It's about building the relationships to understand another person, another organization at a deeper level, and reflecting it through the lens of another human, through empathy, through values, and also kind of maybe sometimes articulating things that are rendered invisible to the people who are so deep in their work. They want to reach certain ends, and it's outstanding. But to create that communicative environment is the work of another sometimes, right? So this is a really kind of connected, people-driven work to articulate, to see an organization, to see an impact-driven individual, to see maybe even a new technology, and to create conversations, ways of understanding it.
Let's pivot to purpose. I mean, you being a major proponent of purpose and purpose mindset, you actually brought this conversation every year into your classroom. And so talk a little bit about why purpose is important for you and how that has helped you to make decisions.
Creating the terminology to extend our thinking from growth to purpose, because I'm trying to find ways for our community. So I teach a class that all students that start our program take. I've been doing that for now 8 years. I often think, okay, what are the common things we should be thinking about as future citizens of the world? How can I kind of not only create a community of learners, but maybe I'm aiming towards doing good? Because we all can do that in our own way, right? We all can cultivate ourselves to do our work, and it can manifest itself in different ways. But then we're surrounded by a lot of different things that are happening around us in our maybe countries that we come from, in our national context. So how can we create a framework with which people can understand that. So this is my kind of purpose, creating that, igniting that passion for various generations of graduate learners. So one thing that I think you articulate very well is this kind of movement from I to we. In graduate school, when you're trying to cultivate who you are, it's a very I-based space. Correct. Investing in yourself, you're trying to figure out what comes next. Maybe you're trying to build your leadership practice. It's all about I. And then the we becomes sometimes like the salad. Okay,
Right.
I like the we, but, it's my time, not our time yet.
Yeah. Right.
And I don't agree with that. And for me, purpose mindset is that I tell students, success is not a goal, because success is an abstracting success in what and why, right?
Right.
The why is the kind of the purpose-driven space. So I almost think that there's never an I, always a we. And I want students to be able to see that I believe that. I really believe that in my personal relations, in my, kind of community relations too. I am a part of something,
Yeah.
And that sensibility, I think, and thinking with that is really, really important for me and my students.
This concept of I versus we is just so important to ingrain in people, especially in this today's world where everybody is just so focused on the self. I just completed another podcast with another colleague, somebody that had taken my class, and she's now become an entrepreneur. And she framed purpose in a way that I've never really thought of. She says you cannot discover your purpose. You can only remember your purpose. Because purpose is with you. It's just that we forget about it. So how do we get into a place where we remember what our purpose is? And what you've been doing in the class and what you do with your students is to give them that opportunity to remember it.
Yeah.
And then by putting them into a collective environment of remembrance, it actually becomes much more powerful. So let me end by asking you this one golden nugget of yours, this piece of wisdom that you want to share with our listeners.
Thinking with purpose and understanding from as early as you can that we're here to serve, I think is really, really important. Our purpose kind of is the guiding light with which we understand ourselves in the world. And we are able to only with purpose really realize our full selves. I really believe that I have seen so many times students when they switch from that I to we, their eyes open up. They almost, I totally agree. It's a lightning bolt. They hear themselves, right? And then they hear others. So it is a much richer sound that purpose allows us to hear.
Yeah. This is such a good way to end, right? Purpose is that whisper. Our friend and Erica, our colleague, is always talking about the voices within us. But in so many times, the voices within us are very loud and distracting. So how do you focus on that whisper within us, which is what your purpose? And how do you then bring that to the front? And what you're doing in the classroom is exactly that. Ekin, thank you so very much for being part of Living with Purpose. Again, continue to listen to our podcast. We get some amazing guests. If you're interested in the book, Living with Purpose, reach out to me. And once again, thank you so very much for being part of the conversation.
Thank you for having me.